بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم.
Who are we talking about? Imam Al-Bukhari. And I know, mashallah, most of you have heard of who Imam Al-Bukhari is. But I want to give a little bit of depth to the understanding that we have. Because many times we only know what we read in the little pamphlets or in the 5-minute videos. And if you go over to the 6th minute, then people get impatient. Imam Al-Bukhari, Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani said about him, he is a mountain of memorization. Yani his memory was so good, he was like a mountain in it. And he was the Imam for the entire dunya, yani for the entire world. He was a leader in fiqh and understanding of hadith. Imam Al-Bukhari, his name is, what's his name? Ismail Muhammad. His name is not Bukhari. This is giving nasab to the area where he was from. His name is not Ismail, that's his father. His name is Muhammad. Muhammad ibn Ismail ibn Ibrahim ibn Mughira. After Mughira, we are not even sure about his lineage, because before Islam, they were not concerned about the lineage. But Mughira, he is the one who became Muslim. His great-grandfather. We see in some of the books, they say grandfather, but that is correct. That is incorrect. Why? Because he's Muhammad. Who is his father? Ismail. Who is his grandfather? Ibrahim. So his great-grandfather. And it's easy to remember his name. We should memorize. Why? Because we can look at the order of Anbiya. Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, from the lineage of Ismail alayhi salam, the son of Ibrahim alayhi salam. We should use these tricks to memorize the names and the chains. And when we talk about Imam Al-Bukhari and we can't even memorize his name, then it's a pretty sad day for us. Ibn Abi Hatim, the great scholar, he narrates from his father, يعني Abu Hatim. فقال الإمام البخاري وأمير المؤمنين في الحديث بلا منازع. Abu Hatim, the great scholar of Jarh al-Ta'dil, said, he is the Amir al-Mu'minin. He is the leader of the believers in hadith without discussion, without dispute. Imam Al-Bukhari, his great-grandfather at the hands of Yaman al-Ju'fi. And that's why you see in his name, it says al-Ju'fi, even though he's not from the tribe of al-Ju'f. But at that time, when somebody would become Muslim through one of the Arab tribes, they would honorarily call him Mawlahum. Yani he is associated with them because they knew the importance of having recognition. So here, this is why he's called Ju'fi. And the father of Imam Al-Bukhari, his name is Ismail. He was a very pious man. And he was a man of great intellect. And he is, as Ibn Hibban and others have reported, a thiqa, reporter in hadith. And he went and studied hadith from who? Imam Malik, Imam Dar al-Hijrah, the Imam of Medina. So his father went and he did business and he took hadith from Imam Malik. And at his deathbed, as reported in the authentic narration, at his deathbed, Ismail, he said there is not a single dirham of haram or shak. And there is not a single, you know the Islamic currency? What's the Islamic currency? There is dinar and dirham. What's the difference? This is our situation. Forget about the homeless. Let's start talking about learning some basics of Islam first. A dinar is made out of gold. And a dirham is made out of silver. So dirham is lighter. So he said there is not a single dirham even that is from haram or even doubtful matters. Now let us, when we talk about Al-Bukhari and his great memorization and what he did for the dunya, you have to wonder how. Like, how did he get to be who he was? Some people say he had a photogenic memory. I don't agree with that. You see little lectures now on YouTube, he had a photogenic memory, he was a genius. That's not true. Why? He wasn't even reading. To have a photogenic memory, you have to get a book. Imam Al-Bukhari, he memorized everything without books. Yani this is a mu'jiza, this is a karama, this is a miracle from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's not just because he was intelligent. There's a lot of intelligent people in the world, they're not Bukharis. So what Imam Al-Bukhari had, first thing, a pious father. So all of you brothers sitting here, if there is shak, if there is doubt in your rizq, forget about haram. If there is even doubt in your rizq, then don't expect Bukhari to be in your house. You tell your children, why aren't you like Bukhari? Where is your rizq coming from? First thing. Second thing, his father was a person of knowledge. He encouraged his son with knowledge, and he was wealthy. Like some people think, to be religious, you got to be broke. You got to be like, begging people, and you're wearing ripped up clothes. Imam Al-Bukhari was wealthy. And he never took money for Islamic activities. His father was a tajir. Imam Bukhari did tijara, he did business. He never took money for Islamic activity. He used that wealth for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on ilm. And his father left him with enough that he never had to worry. And we'll talk about that a little bit. His father, a pious man who took care of his rizq, who did tijara and learned ilm, took hadith, a thiqa narrator himself. But his mother is the one we really need to talk about. A very pious woman. Because Imam Al-Bukhari's father died, and according to some of the ulama, when he was around 6 years old. Some of them said 10 years old. But when he was a little kid, Imam Al-Bukhari's father died. He left him with halal rizq. He left him with good instructions. He left him with a love of ilm, with stories about him going to Imam Malik and the piety of Imam Malik and the love for hadith. But his mother then, she dedicated him to knowledge. And she had other children. And she had responsibilities. But she loved for him to learn. But at a very young age, he went blind. He went what? Blind. So now, even though he was memorizing a lot, he was learning the Quran, but if you're blind, how will you write? How will you then check the book? So she knew that would be difficult for him to study. So she would spend the nights crying. I was looking at the different biographies. There's different amounts of time given how long he was blind. But some of the ulama said for years he was blind. But his mother never gave up. Think about this. Like if your child goes blind, what are you going to do? First thing, learn to a doctor. You're not going to make dua first. Trust me. Be honest. Don't try to. First thing, you're going to be running to a doctor, and then maybe you will say, oh, I should make dua. And you will make dua for 5 minutes or less. And then if it doesn't happen, you're like, my dua is not answered. This is our kismat. Then we get upset. We don't have that patience. For years she made dua continuously in the night, crying to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala until she saw a dream. And in that dream she saw Ibrahim alayhi salam. And Ibrahim alayhi salam, he told her that from your dua and your crying, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has cured your child. And when she woke up and she went to her son, his eyesight had returned. No, it wasn't eye surgery. They didn't have to get, no. It is the power of ikhlas and dua. All of us here need to make dua for that woman. Because if it wasn't for her dua, we wouldn't have the Sahih Al-Bukhari sitting on our shelves. We wouldn't have, what would we do in fiqh? What would we do in tafsir? Today when we have discussions and somebody says, Rawahu Al-Bukhari, khalas. We step back. But it's from that woman and her dua. We need to make dua for her. This pious woman, she dedicated her son to ilm. At 11 years of age, how old are you? How many books do you memorize? Look at 11 years of age, he's sitting in the dars of Al-Dakhili. Al-Dakhili is one of his teachers. Al-Dakhili, he's reading from memory. Like today I have my notes. In the Arab, this was a sign of weakness. He was reading from his memory. And he says, Abu Zubayr reported from Ibrahim. And Imam Bukhari is 11 years old. And he doesn't have a book. And he's sitting in the dars. And his teacher is a sheikh. He says, فَحَدَثْنَا Abu Zubayr an Ibrahim. Imam Al-Bukhari gets up and says, Sheikh, it's a mistake. With adab. Don't get me wrong. Nowadays people look for mistakes. Gotcha. No. With good akhlaq, with adab, he gets up, he says, Sheikh, this is a mistake, it cannot be. The Sheikh, he tells him, trust me, I'm the one who narrates the hadith, I know. Imam Bukhari says, Sheikh, it cannot be. The Sheikh goes back to his book, because they used to have it written as well. He checks, he finds a mistake, he comes back, and he asks Imam Al-Bukhari, then what is the right sanad? Imam Bukhari says, Zubair ibn Uday and Ibrahim. He says, how did you know that? I didn't even tell you this hadith yet. How did you know that? It's not yet ilm al-ghayb or something. No. He said, because I knew the tabaqat, which narrator lived. And Abu Zubair could not have been in the time when he would report from Ibrahim, that narrator. He knew the rijal at 11 years of age. His teacher tells him, you are correct. SubhanAllah. When he was young, and different ulama said at different times. Many of the ulama said when he went to Basra, he went and the kids would play, he would be sitting by himself. When he was sitting in the dars, after a long time, they noticed he didn't take notes. That's why don't worry about photogenic memories. Worry about your taqwa. He didn't take notes. So the other kids started telling him, you know what? Why are you wasting your time here? Like, we're learning. You're sitting here just wasting. You don't play. You don't have fun. You don't take notes. Like, what are you doing here? Imam Bukhari said, you take your notes. Let me do what I have to do. So they kept messing with him. Until Imam Bukhari said, okay, go get your notes. All of you. Get your notes. And he started to narrate to them every hadith that they had heard with the sanad, with the chain. You know how many hadith he narrated? How many? 1, 10, 15,000 ahadith from memory, and he was less than 14 years of age. At 14 years old, 14, how many of you are over 14 here? Raise your hands. MashaAllah, you brothers are under 14? MashaAllah. At 14 years of age, he had finished mastering the ulum from the ulama of Samarkand and Al-Bukhari. And at 16, he had memorized not just the Quran, not just the hadith that he took, but all of the works of Abdullah ibn Mubarak and Imam Al-Waqi'. He had finished. All the ulama, they said everything we had, he's already memorized. So he took a trip with his mother and his older brother at 16 to go for Hajj. And he went to Mecca and Medina, and he saw the halaqat of ilm and the trade of ilm and the ulama there. And he begged his mother to stay. And we see some of the little lectures nowadays, they say that his mother and his older brother, they went back and he stayed. And this is a mistake. If you look in the books of Tariq, his mother, she stayed. She dedicated her life. She didn't say, I got other kids, I got dishes, I got this, I got a house. What about the people that come for, mastah? No, his mother, she stayed just to facilitate his learning. And he started to learn from the ulama of Hijaz at the age of 18. Now, how many of you are over 18? MashaAllah, I only have like 4 or 5 brothers over 18. The rest of you are really young. You guys just look mature, MashaAllah. How many of us are over 18? Raise your hands. Over 18. At 18, Imam Al-Bukhari, he wrote Tariq Al-Kabir, which I have seen in 9 volumes. The print that I saw was 9 volumes. At 18 years of age, he wrote a book on history, compiling the narrators, the ilm al-rijal, one of the hardest subjects. 18 years of age. Ibn Jawzi, he mentions this, and he authentically reports this. It's not like stories. It's the checking of history. Then he had heard about Imam Ahmad bin Hanbal, the great Imam of Hadith, the one who was known that he was the father of all of the teachers of Hadith, from what he used to teach. So he went at that age to Iraq, to Baghdad, to study from Ahmad. And this is the way of students of ilm. They travel for ilm. They don't just say, let me YouTube it. they travel, they go and study. So he went to Imam Ahmad bin Hanbal and he took from him the hadith. And then he continued his travels. He went to Nishabur, to Baghdad, to Basra, to Kufa, to Damascus, to Al-Quds, to Misr, to Mecca, Al-Madinah and other areas. He spent these years studying ilm. And at 30 years of age, after Imam Ahmad bin Hanbal had passed away, he returned to Baghdad. I hope my sisters are paying attention. So at 30 years of age, when he went back to Baghdad, the ulama of Baghdad, they heard about this young kid. And at 30 he was a kid to them. These are ulama that were 60 and 70. And they heard about how Imam Ahmad praised him. And they said, how can this kid be what they've hyped him to be? He said, let's test him. So what did they do? What did they do? You all know this. They took 10 people to narrate 10 hadith. So when they would get together in halaqat, they would teach ilm to each other. And inshallah, we'll stop for salah, and after salah, we'll continue with what the test was and what happened with Imam Ahmad bin Hanbal. Jazakum Allahu khairan. Inshallah, about 10-15 more minutes of the talk, and then we have food. Inshallah, you can socialize and we can enjoy. I want to finish up about the life of Imam Al-Bukhari, rahmatullah alayhi. So inshallah, I'm going to give 2 minutes on purpose for our brothers and our sisters, our sisters to finish their conversations, at least out of love and respect for Imam Al-Bukhari and what he did for this ummah. We can give these 10-15 minutes of not talking, and inshallah after that, from my side, you can talk all night long till Fajr. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen wa salatu wa salam ala ashraf al-mursaleen wa ala alihi wa ashabihi ajma'een amma ba'd. Imam Al-Bukhari, he is now returning to Baghdad. And he's already been to Baghdad and he took ilm from Imam Ahmad bin Hanbal. And Imam Ahmad said about him that I have not seen somebody better in hadith, more qualified, smarter, better from Khurasan than Imam Al-Bukhari. And because there were many great scholars in Khurasan, this was taken as a great compliment. And that was when he was only 18 years of age. Now that he's 30 and his reputation has even grown. And Imam Al-Bukhari, he had memorized 300,000 ahadith. 300,000 ahadith. I will ask you later, so remember that. So this had become something of an amazing thing. This young man who had memorized all these hadith, had been to all these areas, and all these ulama were praising him. So the ulama, they decided to put him to a test. Now pay attention to the test, because we hear about it, but we don't really think about it. Imam Al-Bukhari does not know that it's going to be a test. He is just coming from traveling. You know when you travel, and you're jet lagged, and you're tired, so it's not even a nice Emirates airline Qatar jet with recycling seats. He's coming through camels and deserts and hardships, and he's just coming in, and they tell him we're just having a gathering. And the way at that time was when they had gatherings, sisters, Assalamu alaikum. The way of that time is when they had gatherings, they wouldn't say, how is this guy's football team doing? How's this going? They would narrate a hadith. And this way they would get together, but they would benefit from ilm. So he told Imam Al-Bukhari, we will narrate a hadith in your honor. So 10 people will narrate 10 ahadith. And they started to narrate a hadith. And they began with one person. And when he narrated the first hadith, they asked Imam Al-Bukhari, do you know this hadith? And for an example, the hadith إنما الأعمال بالنيات وكل امرئ ما نوى ومن كان هجرته لله ورسوله وهجرته لله ورسوله ومن كان هجرته للدنيا يصيبها أو امرأة ينكهها فهجرته إلى ما هاجر إليه. Famous hadith, the first hadith in Al-Bukhari, the first in the Arba'un of Nawawi. Everybody knows this hadith, every little child knows this hadith. Every deed is based upon the intention. So when they narrated with the chain, they said, do you have this hadith? He said, no. SubhanAllah, this famous Imam, and he doesn't know this hadith? So then they narrate a second hadith, and a third, and a fourth, and a fifth, and a sixth, and a seventh, and an eighth, and a ninth, and a 10th. One person. Then the next person, and every time they asked him, do you know this hadith? He said, no. So they had 10 people narrate 10 ahadith. How many ahadith is that? Was my math major's at? 100 ahadith. Every one of them, he said, I don't know this. Because what they had done is called iqlab. As a test, they switched up the chains of narrators. So they took the chain of one hadith and they said it with the 7th hadith, and the second hadith with the 8th hadith, and one hadith with the other person. And all they did, and if I was to narrate those chains to you, wallahi, none of you will know that I made a mistake. Because none of us today memorize the sanad, and even if you do, we don't really pay that kind of attention. But Imam Al-Bukhari said, I don't know this hadith, not because he didn't know the wording, but he had not heard it with that chain. Because they were wrong. And when they finished, now pay attention. When they finished, Imam Al-Bukhari said, I don't know any of these. What I do know is the first sanad you read matches the 7th hadith he said. The second sanad you read matches, subhanallah, Ibn Hajar Asqalani, Imam Ibn Hajar, in Fath al-Bari, in the Muqaddamah, he says, it is not amazing that Imam Bukhari knew this hadith. I mean, even if you think about that, at random, there is no like, we're going to choose from this book or this range. At random, from the hundreds of thousands of ahadith, if I randomly read ahadith and mixed up chains, no scholar today will catch it. That's amazing in itself. That at random they took 100 ahadith, mixed up the chains, and he knew that they were wrong and he knew the right hadith. But Ibn Hajar says what's even more amazing is he even memorized the wrong chains. One time he heard it, he memorized the wrong chains and he was able to put them correct. And that is why this is not just about having a photogenic memory, it is about being a karama from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And after this, the people of Bukhara and the people of Sham and the people of Misr, they all heard about this great Imam. When we talk about Imam Al-Bukhari, I always wonder how he became who he was. And that is the important point that I'm going to make today. How Imam Bukhari became who he was. One of the things Imam Bukhari himself says, he goes, Wallahi, in my whole life, I never backbited anyone. In the whole life. Now imagine, be honest, fear Allah. If I was to ask any one of you, or if you were to ask me, not your whole life, just in the last year, have you backbited somebody or not? Then you will know why we're not what Imam Bukhari was. Imam Al-Bukhari, he masters many ulum. He wrote many books. His most famous book is what? What's it called? Sahih Bukhari, that's not the name of the book. That's what we call it. What did he call it? Al-Jami' al-Sahih. And why? Because he had memorized 300,000 ahadith. Imagine, with the sanad. Today, find me a scholar that's memorized 100,000 and I will consider him the greatest scholar. With the chain, not just the wording. He memorized 300,000. Out of that, 200,000 were weak. 100,000 were strong. But he sat and he contemplated and he thought until he only chose 2,230 ahadith. Sahih al-Bukhari, if you take with repetition, repeating the ahadith, then it's 7,275. But unique ahadith, only 2,230 out of the 100,000 sahih ahadith that he knew. But how did he write it? He spent 16 years writing this book. When you look at that book on your shelf, appreciate the effort. 16 years. Not that he couldn't write, but thinking and checking and getting to a standard that today, بإجماع الأمة, by the consensus of our ummah today, أصح الكتاب بعد الكتاب الله والبخاري. Today by consensus we say the most authentic book of hadith after the book of Allah, meaning after the book of Allah, the Quran is the word of Allah. It's not in the running. That is above and beyond. That's the kalam of Allah. But every book written in hadith, out of all of them, the most authentic, Al-Bukhari. And Imam Al-Bukhari says that I didn't write them down until I went to Al-Madinah. And I sat in the Rawdah of Al-Nabi alayhi salatu wasalam. And I made a fresh wudu. And I made 2 rak'atayn. He made 2 istikhara, and wrote down each one of these ahadith. Subhanallah. It's not that he just made 2 rak'ah. With a fresh wudu in the Rawdah of Masjid al-Nabawi, with istikhara, he wrote down each hadith. And that's why 16 years of contemplation and thinking and effort, he wrote Sahih al-Bukhari. But he wrote many other books like Adab al-Mufrad, like Raf' al-Yadayn fi al-Salah, Al-Qira khalf al-Imam, Al-Tarikh al-Sughra, wal-Awsat, wal-Kubra, and many other books. But he studied from no less than 1,000 ulama. He took ilm from 1,000 ulama. And he had 90,000 students. And for the sake of time, I'm not going to get into who those ulama were and who those amazing students were. But you can understand that if you study from 1,000 ulama and you have 90,000 students, what kind of effort he made for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I will mention one last thing. And inshallah, well, 2 last things. And I will end with that. One, on why Imam Al-Bukhari was Imam Al-Bukhari. One time he was on a trip for tijara, for trade. Because he had a job, he did tijara. And he had 10,000 dinar. Now I asked you earlier, what is a dinar and what is a dirham? Dinar is expensive, it's the gold, Islamic gold coin. Dirham is silver. So he had 10,000 dinar. And Allah knows best, but today, imagine 10,000 solid gold coins, it would be at least $1 million. Look at how much gold is today. 10,000 solid gold coins, it would at least be around $1 million. So he had that with him. It's very important. Sisters, you can eat later. So he has 10,000 dinar, and a man with him on the ship starts to talk to him. He tells him, who are you? He said, my name is Muhammad ibn Ismail. Because you are Al-Bukhari. He says, that is what people know me as, humbly. He tells him, what are you doing? He said, I'm in tijara. He said, how much do you have? He said, I have 10,000 dinar. But this man was an evil man, a wicked man. So what did he do? He went to the captain of the ship and he said, somebody stole my 10,000 dinar. You see, this trick. Because he knew that Imam Bukhari would not lie. And he knew that he had 10,000 dinar. He was hoping that when the people are searched and they find the 10,000 dinar, they will say, oh, this is it. Because you already said you had 10,000, and they will give him to him. Imagine, this is Imam Al-Bukhari and what you're doing. But this man, dunya, it blinded him. So the captain, he announced that 10,000 dinar have been stolen, and we're going to search everybody until we find him. Now, Imam Al-Bukhari, it's his money. So he can recognize, like today, if somebody says, I lost $50, and somebody says, I found it, we can ask them, how was it? Was it in 2 $10 bills? Was it, you can explain. So he could explain that money that that man couldn't. If that man was asked, what kind of pouch is it in? He wouldn't know. How is it arranged? He wouldn't know. So Imam Bukhari would have come out to be truthful. He would have said, this is imagine today, you have $1 million. And somebody claims that you stole it. You're going to be like, this is my money. I earned this money. This is my halal money. I'm not giving it up. Right? Right? What did Imam Al-Bukhari do? quietly went, he took the 10,000 dinar, he threw them overboard, into the ocean. 10,000 dinar of hard-earned, $1 million of your, for example, hard-earned halal. He didn't win it in a lottery or some haram. Hard-earned money. He threw it overboard. Didn't say anything. They searched him, they didn't find 10,000 dinar. That man, he turned out to be a liar. Everybody realized it. That man, after a while, he comes to Imam Bukhari. He tells him, where did you hide it? Like, that's impressive. Because I know you didn't lie to me. So where did you hide it? Imam Bukhari told him, I threw it overboard. The man said, what? How could you throw 10,000 dinar overboard? It was your money. You would have got it anyway. What good is it going to do in the ocean? What did Imam Bukhari say? He said, I have spent a lifetime preserving the ahadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And if tukhma, if an accusation of stealing would have been made on me, then people would not have accepted those ahadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So out of love for Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, out of love for the ahadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, after care for preserving the authenticity of those ahadith, 10,000 dinar is nothing to me. Subhanallah. This is what made Imam Al-Bukhari Imam Al-Bukhari. The last thing I will mention, there is the fitna of Muhammad ibn Yahya al-Duhali and Imam Al-Bukhari and Khalq al-Quran. I'm not going to get into that because honestly, everybody that I listened to discuss it did not fulfill the haqq of it. Imam al-Duhali was a great imam. They make him seem out to be a really bad guy. So I'm not even going to, you are not ready, you don't have time, I'm not going to discuss it. But there is the issue of Khalid al-Duhali. When Imam al-Bukhari, after 60 years of serving the ilm, went back to his hometown of Bukhara, the Amir of Bukhara, his name is Khalid al-Duhali. He comes to him, everybody still attentive, and he tells him, you're a great imam, I will pay you whatever you like. I will pay you a lot of money. Come and teach my children hadith. Is he telling him to do something haram? Haram? Everybody awake? Haram to teach hadith? No. So is he telling him something good? Teaching hadith is good, right? Or it's bad? Ahmad, it's good. So he's telling him to do something good. But he says, I want you to come to my palace and I will pay you lavish money. And you can stay there and everything. Just teach my kids. Imam Al-Bukhari tells him, if your children want to learn hadith, let them come to the masjid. Imagine today, be honest. Allah, at least be honest with yourself. Imagine today some king of some oil-rich country, I won't mention any names, tells you that I'm going to pay you 200,000 a year. 200,000 tax-free dollars a year, and give you a driver, and give you a house, and your wife can go shopping, and you can take a trip every year. Just come and teach my children Islam. I don't know about you, but I'll be like, what flight are we going to be going on? And be honest, don't lie. I'm teaching Islam and I'm getting paid and I'm being a Muslim country and this. Wallahi, mashallah. Barakah from Allah, Allah bless me. Imam Al-Bukhari tells him, if your children want to learn hadith, let them come to the masjid. He tells him what? My children, children of the king. He said, if they are tulab ilm, it doesn't matter whose children they are. The place for learning is the masjid. Khalas. Khalid al-Duhali is the Amir. He's the leader. He tells him, okay. You're off the manhaj. No, I'm just kidding. He tells him, I'll come to the masjid, but there'll be a separate section for me and my children. There'll be a separate khas for me and my children, and you will teach us in the masjid, but us separate. He said no. Imam Al-Bukhari said no. If you want to learn hadith, you have to sit in the halaqah like everybody else. And Imam Bukhari says, he goes, I will never take money for teaching. He said, because I dedicated my life to learn the words of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and teach them sallallahu alaihi wasallam for what? The pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I will never sell my ilm. Imagine us today. So then, Khalid al-Duhli, he made a lot of plots and problems, and Imam Al-Bukhari, he died with being disgraced by the people. The people are against him. But in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you look at his status, that till today, go to any madrasa, any fiqh, Hanafi, Shafi'i, Hanbali, Maliki, Zahiri, in Saudi, in Pakistan, in Afghanistan, in Malaysia, you go to Africa, you go to Russia, you go to China, any madrasa. It will not be called a madrasa unless the Sahih of Bukhari is taught in it. There will not be a alim if he has not studied al-Bukhari. And when we discuss sanad, and somebody says, Rawahu Tirmidhi, we can say, is it Sahih, is it Da'if? Ibn Majah, we can argue. When somebody says, Rawahu al-Bukhari, Imam al-Bukhari, he became Imam al-Bukhari through his sacrifices, through his love for ilm, for his taqwa, his wara. And that's why we hope that the tulab al-ilm, the students of knowledge, will take a lesson and not want to learn ilm in 3-minute increments on YouTube, and will not want to rush through ilm, and will not want to just pay for ilm, and will not want to get shortcuts in ilm, but rather will dedicate their lives mukhlisan. Which way? Mukhlisan lillahi subhanahu wa ta'ala. If somebody is paying for you and it becomes easy, that's not ilm. When you sacrifice your own money, your own time, your own self, and you spend those hard days working to make that money, and you take that money and then you spend it on ilm, then you will benefit from ilm. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make Al-Bukhari an example for us, and make our children to be like Imam Al-Bukhari and to be the flag bearers of Islam. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that what we hear, we implement in our life. Jazakumullahu khairan. Now you can have conversations and talk and eat as long as you like, inshallah. Any questions? I will open up now, inshallah. MashaAllah. Answered everything so well. Nobody has a question? Khalas. Jazakum. Faddalu, Dr. Sir. It doesn't matter who it's from.
The question is, he was talking about providing food and saying that not to thank him, but thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now my question is that I know somebody here in Liverpool, actually we saw people standing in front of the old people. And the person said, okay, at least once a week, we take good money for out.
MashaAllah. Which Home Depot so I can get myself in? Work. MashaAllah. They thought that now if someone gets sick, they say I need his food. So we have something freedom that is being somebody in return is Inshallah, we'll get disclaimers. We'll tell the homeless to sign it before we give them food. Imam Al-Bukhari? Imam Al-Bukhari, ulama of Tariq have discussed, but into his 70s. Because he was 60 when he went back to Bukhara, and we know at least 5 years after that he had some fitan, and then he left. So he lived, alhamdulillah, a good life. Any other questions? Faddal Umar. Imam Al-Bukhari, when he was going through these fitan in his town, he left his town, and as he was exiting Bukhara, he made dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala out of the extreme tension that he was under. He said, oh Allah, give me life as long as it's good for me, and give me death when it's better for me. And before he finished his dua, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala took his life, and he is currently buried in Al-Bukhara. Faddal. So Imam Al-Bukhari's father Ismail, he had left a good amount of money, but Imam Bukhari invested it as well. As we were discussing about his rihla for tijara, for business, so he didn't just take from that money, but he used it in business and he would work. And that is the way of many of the ai*imma of the past, that they would study and then they would take time out to work and they would gain rizq and then they would study more and they would use that ability. And even like today we may think if he just sat and studied, he would have memorized a lot more. But Imam Ahmad, he memorized 1,000,000 ahadith and he was working as a day laborer. Somebody would sell himself into labor. Imagine all of us that could get grants for $1 million and study, how many hadith will he memorize? So it's not about the time but the barakah in it. So he would use that money and he would continue to invest, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala put barakah in it, that till his death he used that. Faddalu. Excellent question. So Khalid al-Duhili, and there is, for those advanced students, you know the other issue of Muhammad ibn Yahya al-Duhili, it's not the same issue. Khalid al-Duhili, who was the Amir of the area, what he did, he couldn't kill Al-Bukhari. Imam Bukhari was too famous, and he had strong students. His students would stand up for him, like Imam Muslim and others were his students. So what did he do? He bribed another alim to give fatwa in the name of Bukhari. You understand? Like today what happens is, let's say, mashallah, your father is a pious alim and he's famous. Somebody will say, I went there and he gave this weird fatwa, which he didn't give. And they will attribute it to him, and now you will see on YouTube and people will be saying that he said this and he said you can bury this and that. And that's what they did, ajib fatwa. Like one of the ones they said, that Al-Dhahabi, he records, that Khalid al-Duhili, he told this man to spread the false rumor that Imam Bukhari said that if you drink the milk of a goat, she becomes mahram to you. Now this is foolish. Mahram rida is through drinking the milk of a woman when you are under a certain age for 5 stomachfuls and this. It has nothing to do with cows and goats. But they lied and they said Bukhari said the goat becomes mahram. And they started the social media of that time. Today you have Facebook. There was social media at that time. It was gossip. They started telling, you know what Bukhari said? He said this. He said this. He gave this strange fatwa. And that is the fitna they made until Imam Bukhari became very upset. Because for a man of haqq, when false is attributed, it's a very hard thing to take. And even though today the name is cleared, we know who did what. And Khalid al-Duhili, he was punished by the Khalifa after the death of Imam Al-Bukhari for corruption. And that corrupt alim was also punished for taking bribery. And their names are unheard of today. Imam Al-Bukhari has the tongue of every talib ilm. I'm sorry? Yes, he was Muslim. And as a shock to you maybe, there are Muslims that get corrupted. And there are Muslims who do things they shouldn't do. And this is unfortunate. Many times when you see jealousy and you see pride getting in the way, Muslims do things they shouldn't do. May Allah forgive us all. Any other questions? Anything off subject? No questions? We good? طيب جزاكم الله خير. سبحان الله.
ومن أحسن قولا ممن دعا إلى الله وعمل صالحا